it's lovely for me to see who I'm talking to. So seeing that we've got a mix of primary, secondary, we've got some EAL leads, we've got some teacher training providers, welcome, and also some community language teachers, which is amazing for me to know. I've got some slides prepared. I have left time at the end for questions and discussions, and I won't necessarily be able to see the chat while I'm presenting. So if you have got questions, do type them in the chat and I will catch up afterwards. Let me just start with my slideshow. Here we are. So I'm Sabine Little. I'm a senior lecturer in languages education at the University of Sheffield. I'm a trained languages teacher. I originally taught German and French at secondary school many, many years ago. I originally did my PhD in motivation and language learning, but when my own son was born, he's now 16, I suddenly realized that him growing up multilingual and how he was navigating the education system, what that meant for his language learning, I found that more interesting, with apologies, than being a foreign language learning researcher. So I focused on multilingualism, identity, and belonging. I've got my email at the start and at the end, and I am genuinely extending an invitation for anybody to get in touch with me with anything, any questions they might have. I'm hoping that we'll have a great opportunity for me to share some of my work, share some ideas, but also at the end, time for discussion and questions. So a bit of a roadmap for today. We'll start with a bit of an introduction, getting a lay of the land. I've got a few tiny stats that would be really quick. I've got a couple of quotes from pupils because they're why we're here after all. There's a couple of quotes from teachers as well. I can't quite remember where they fall in the presentation. And then I've focused on the idea of multilingualism as an asset in the classroom, but also as an asset for homeschool links. So connecting the home and the school, engaging with parents, etc. And then, as I mentioned, some discussion time at the end where you might want to make plans for short, mid and long-term changes. You might decide that I've taught Granny to suck eggs for 40 minutes, 50 minutes or so. Let's see how it goes. So by way of stats, like I said, I've got two slides. They're both very short. We're at the point in time where over a quarter of children in our schools at the moment have at least one parent that has been born abroad. I am one such parent, for example. So we are at the point where actually the children with migration backgrounds, if we are taking them collectively, are our single largest minority group in our classrooms. And 20 to 25%, depending on primary, secondary, etc., of pupils are registered as having English as an additional language. And there's a German word that I really love. It's called Dunkelziffer, which literally translates as dark number. But it's the number of pupils who are actually invisible as multilinguals. And my son is one of these. And the reason is my son does not struggle with English. So my son is not identified as an EAL pupil because he's identified as an English native speaker. So we know that 20 to 25% of pupils are registered as EAL. But we also know that there are actually students, more students or learners who are multilingual, who never quite make it onto the EAL register. So here's one example from a research project of mine. Benedict, which is a pseudonym, was in year 6, and that's also not him. He was in year 6, so he'd been in the same school for 6 years, and he told me that nobody in school knows I speak Hungarian. So that was just one child from a study that will pop up again later. It's one of my favorite studies. And then this next quote is my favorite quote because it came after me going into schools, trying to identify multilingual readers. And I'd asked the teacher to identify the pupils that she knew were reading in their home languages. And for 20 minutes, I tried to get the children to talk about their reading in their home languages without being explicit, because I'm not going to ask a leading question. And when one of the children finally took pity upon me and realized what I was after, she said, I read all the Harry Potter books in Bengali, but why do you want to know about that? Nobody wants to know about that. I will admit, if you hear me speaking more than once, this quote, especially when I work with teachers, pops up again and again, because I think it really helps to understand how children get very quick at editing their own identities and understanding what aspects of their identities are, in their views, desired or welcome in different contexts. And this 8-year-old who said nobody wants to know about that, it was a few years ago now, this quote, and it drives me to this day to prove to this girl, who would be about 14 now maybe, that yes, we absolutely do want to know about that. So I do share that quote regularly. There is still somewhat in England a deficit model of multilingualism, and some of the things that I've spoken about just now highlight that if a student struggles with English, their home language might be seen as a problem, but if they don't struggle with English, then their home language might be invisible. And that is something that in my research I've come across again and again, although I must say, having done this for quite a while, it is getting better year on year, and that is largely due to people like you. So a massive thank you for all the work that you are doing. And as I mentioned, students do understand very quickly which of their languages matter, in which context, and they self-edit their identities accordingly. So while we are talking about languages and multilingualism from a learning perspective, and a lot of the things that I'm talking about highlights how being able to draw on multiple languages is a great asset to learning, because that's the topic of the talk. There are also real benefits to identity development when children see that their home languages are valued in schools. But mainly today I am focusing on the language learning and the benefits for the classroom and classroom cohesion as well. So an asset model of multilingualism sort of does away with EAL and instead talks about emergent bilinguals or emergent multilinguals, which altogether sounds a bit more positive. And it facilitates learners to draw on their full linguistic repertoire. Now, I'm aware that I'm speaking to a wide range of an audience, and some of you may live and breathe the full linguistic repertoire, but I'm not making that assumption. So indulge me for a moment while I explain this. Something that I wanted to highlight really quickly is this is an example of what my son, who's growing up bilingual English-German, read at age 9. So on the left-hand side is what he read in German. It was a book for 6 years and over. That's what it said on the cover. Whatever we think about age, giving the age range on a book. And on the right-hand side was the then most recent book in the Alex Rider series. I think it was number 9 or 10, and he'd read all the previous ones. So you can imagine that for my son, reading in English was much more fun, because that's where the great stories were, and reading in German was a bit meh, and he did it very much with language development in mind. But he did develop his full linguistic repertoire, and he used one of his languages to develop the other. So let's look at the full linguistic repertoire for a tiny bit. What does it mean? It means that you draw on all your languages for learning. It also means that you develop an understanding of how languages connect with each other, where they share roots, differences in vocabulary. You understand differences in grammar structure, and whether you learn a language or a subject in a language, your full linguistic repertoire can help you. So what that means really is, if any of you are going off for an Italian class or a Mandarin class or a Korean class or an Igbo class or whatever, you are drawing on the knowledge of your languages that you already speak to decode the new one, to make comparisons, to say, oh, in English grammar it works this way, and in this grammar it works that way. So you compartmentalize rules, and once you've understood what is different, you can then more meaningfully apply it rather than trying to learn it by rote and then struggling to make that link in a new context. And the reason I'm explaining this is because using your full linguistic repertoire takes practice. It's not something that we're born to do, and it's certainly not something that children are born to do. So thankfully, again, most recently in the media, we have various common, I don't know, cultural models to draw on. And this one is House of Games, where they have the international, or the Richard Ossman's Haus der Spiele, as it's called. And I just had a look online and saw what screenshots I could find. And I found this one in Icelandic. And I bet most of you will have absolutely no trouble working this out. But if you spend a moment thinking about the process that goes through your head as you do this, you go, okay, Valentine's Day. So you go, oh yeah, Valentinus. That's where it comes from. Then you go Deg. Oh, maybe that's day. I look at this and go, well, Deg is day. In German, it's Tag. So between the two, I've sort of got a D at the start and a G at the end. Great. With a bit more knowledge, we know that that symbol, that sign, that character that looks a bit less well known, that comes from maybe medieval. Older English is pronounced as a th. So then you get, oh, Manuthi. Well, that's almost like month. We know that. And then, and I apologize to any Icelandic speakers for pronunciation, Fagnath doesn't really ring a bell in English. But if I look at that in German, I know that there's a German word called feiert, which is to celebrate. And from Fagnath to feiern, it's not that far along. So this is what I mean when we use our full linguistic repertoire to decode what's going on. And quite a lot of the examples that I'm sharing with you today invite children to bring their full linguistic repertoire to learning. So whereas it might look like we're inviting them to bring their home languages to the classroom for the sake of it, it is actually a genuinely meaningful way to facilitate their linguistic knowledge and understanding. Now, I'm absolutely aware how busy classrooms are, and there is a study there. I'll front load it. The study is called Inert Benevolence. We interviewed 40 primary school teachers in this case to understand their attitudes towards multilingualism in the classroom and what they were able to do. And we coined the term inert benevolence to illustrate that all the teachers that we met were absolutely aware and supportive of multilingualism, but they were, as these quotes say, they were tired, they were busy, they hadn't necessarily had the training that they needed, and many of them berated themselves, even though it wasn't their mistake. We encountered some misunderstandings that teachers said, well, I'm not multilingual, so I don't know that I can support multilingual learners. Claire Cunningham, who's the co-author on this paper, moved on to work on a metaphor where she's referring to teachers as pressed flowers. That paper's only just come out, where she's looking at all the pressures where teachers are showing enthusiasm, and then they get bombarded with the curriculum and timetabling and all the pressures that are undergoing. So just to say, I know that classrooms are busy, and hopefully one of the things that will come out of today is some concrete ideas that you don't have to do the prep work for to integrate multilingualism in the classroom more meaningfully or more holistically, or wherever you are at in your own journey in the classroom at the moment. So that's so much by way of introduction. Let's move on to, and I've sort of put here, moving beyond celebration and registers. And that is one of the things that I found when I talk to children. They think it's great that they have the European Day of Languages, they have International Mother Tongue or Mother Language Day, they have Chinese New Year, but then their languages go back in the cupboard until it's the next opportunity, or the multilingualism is say hello in a different language or say a word in another language during registration, which is a great start, and hopefully one of the things that we're looking at today is the term that I like to use is that we want to normalize multilingualism. Celebrating is great, but at some point celebrations stop. And what we want to show these children is that day in, day out, their languages are welcome. So I'm all about normalizing rather than celebrating necessarily, although I know that for schools, celebrating can be a really good hook into it. And if I don't forget, I'll say a quick example about a school who spent a whole day working through some of the activities that I'm about to share. So I saw we had primary, secondary, early years. I bet in all school ages where you are working at, children are labeling things. And here is one example of a trilingual child. He's growing up in Cantonese, English and Macedonian. And all the teacher said was, you know, just add your own languages. When you are labeling parts of the body, just add your own languages. And this particular child also did primary French as a foreign language, and so decided to add French as well. So you have here a quadrilingual ladybug, which I thought is really nice. But it was also a good opportunity to identify gaps across all languages, and school filled the gaps in English and home filled the gaps in the home language, which of course are again important to develop. And there's the opportunity to build up dictionary skills as well. And because many of these kinds of labeling artwork things go up in the classroom, this has the added bonus of then creating visible multilingualism in the classroom through display materials. And just to show that this isn't necessarily limited to the primary classroom, this is an example from a 16-year-old. And again, we don't have to be language specialists to understand here. This one's only labeled in Spanish, but you can see the similarities in the vocabulary. And I think that helps us as teachers to work out where and how these similarities exist. And then we don't have to be language specialists, but we can say, oh, look, I understand this one. Look, that's actually the same. And that one's almost the same. And you can encourage children to think about word endings, for example. Scientific vocabulary is great because it tends to be more similar across different languages. And I've started down here to share a link that will pop up again and again and again, multilingualisminschools.net, where many of the activities that I'm sharing today are taken from. It's a project called Lost Worlds, and the L is in bracket. And it's a project that I got funding for about 4.5 years ago, starting during COVID, actually. And that was to, the L in brackets refers to the idea that when children lose their words in their heritage language, they lose part of their world in terms of heritage connection. So this, but it lives under multilingualism in schools because arguably that's what it is. That's where you can find tons and tons of different activities that are pre-prepared with lesson plans, with worksheets, with some films, some teacher training PowerPoints, depending on what the activity is. So that is partially what I'm going to talk you through over the next few minutes. I've just brought in some of my favorite ones to have a look at with you and to maybe feed into discussions later. This is one of my favorite. This is an 8-year-old who's growing up in English and Slovak. The link is there at the bottom. It was the activity was called Creature Feature, and the idea is write a who am I kind of puzzle poem about a creature. It's based on the 5 senses, but the idea is that children include words from their home language while still making sure that others can puzzle out the creature that they're saying. I've once given this talk with a Slovak speaker in the room, and we did a bit of performative reading. Because I can't see you, we haven't quite got time to do that. But spend just a little bit of looking at the the slightly lighter coloured, so the sort of blue Slovak words. And when we unpick this again, the class knew it was a who am I activity. So Oscar, age 8, never bothered to write who am I until at the bottom. He starts with kto som. And then at the bottom there, in case you're stuck, you get it twice in English and in Slovak. He starts off completely in English to give his peers a bit of a sense of security. Then when he goes on to cite, he's like, oh, I'm not going to try the Slovak, but can see. We go, okay, well, that's eyes, objective. Oh, look, that's really similar. So you get pupils, again, talking about similarities and differences in languages. And then he gets really brave under hearing. You can see its ears, nothing. And if you show this to children, they all work out that they don't know what it means word for word, but they understand that it probably means it can't hear anything. And then for touch, their sense of, and then the word is repeated. And again, children understand that that is touch. So children have encountered another language. They've understood some of the similarities. They've understood how to make sense of a text without understanding every single word, which would be really useful for foreign language learning down the line or simultaneously. And if they're really switched on, they'll work out that what Oscar was trying to show them is a Komodo dragon, just in case you're wondering. So this again is one of the activities that I love doing with children, because they get so creative, and the language learning, the language awareness that takes place during this, both in terms of creating the poem, but then in terms of understanding each other's poems and just encountering lots of different languages, has been really, really rewarding. Here's one example in the actual slideshow. These are audio files, they're not right now, but an understanding of rhythm in terms of language. And children have the rhythmic notation here on the right and 4 words on the left, which are pronounced, and then they have to work out where does the pattern come from? Which noted pattern aligns with which language? So you have papillon, Schmetterling, Hoedje, and Mariposa, and they have to work out, okay, which one and they can clap, etc. And you will notice a distinct leaning towards creatures, nature, etc. And there is a reason for that, but I'm not going to bother too much to talk about this. But here is an example. The video of what this school did is on the website. This is the activity. It started off as a mini speech song, but this school in Leeds were saying, actually, oh, we're reading owl babies. We're not going to do about mini beasts. We're going to do about owls. And you can see the result on the website. And this is just something that they shared on Twitter while they were doing it. So again, an opportunity to engage with whatever's going on at the moment in your classroom topic-wise and build on that. And these are just a few more ideas from different activities. The one at the top is one of my favorites. I can't remember, I think it's called Guess the Mini Beast or something, but it's a whole slideshow. It lends itself really well to something like an assembly. And it basically quizzes pupils. It gives them just the text on the left-hand side and the translation where necessary. And it says, what do you think that is? So they see, oh, okay, that's a butterfly worm or a deep butterfly or caterpillar in Igbo. And then they go, oh, it's a caterpillar. And then they get shown whether it's right. For example, a slug in German is a naked snail. So again, they get to understand why language does what it does. This is also a great opportunity to go, why is it a butterfly? A butterfly has got nothing to do with butter. It does fly, but it's not a fly. So it helps them understand and empathize why learning other languages can be tricky. Because if we say a hedgehog, those 2 words individually don't get you anywhere near a tiny spiky creature. There is activities on the website linked to picture poems. And then here is one in Tagalog, a poem in Tagalog, to make a little acrostic poem, which here translates to "Don't stop showing the colour, fight for life, don't rest." And if you see a 22 there in terms of the activity, this one is an older student. I think he was a sixth former or a GCSE pupil. 30 Days Wild, if you want to dip your toe in, is coming up in June. And if you've heard of 30 Days Wild in terms of doing something outdoorsy every day in June, the Lost World's Twitter account runs 30 Days Wild Multilingual. And every day, it's the same year. It's the same every year. So this will be the 4th year that we're running it. So there is an activity sheet to download where students can do, you can look ahead. So it will be in line. So day 22, as you saw on the previous slide, that's when that acrostic poem is going to happen. And every day on Twitter, I'll be posting one of those and engaging with schools that are responding, and that's a chance to dip your toe in, and whether you do it every day or you pick some of the days that you're going to focus on, it's a really great chance to get stuck in and encourage multilingualism on a daily basis in different ways. Okay, that's where we're at in terms of in the classroom. I want to briefly talk about homeschool links. I already briefly touched on it when I talked about how parents can help fill in the gaps when children are engaging in home language activities. But I've got 3 ideas. The first one's very, very quick. And the other 2 are slightly more involved in terms of involving parents in your multilingual efforts, again, on an ongoing day-to-day basis. And the first one is as quick as this. When my son was in year 2, I wrote a German book in his reading diary, and I got a letter from his school saying to please not do that and to please write in English, or write English reading only into the book, because that was what the school was interested in. And I sent a very long letter back. I'm afraid in this instance, I was that parent. I sent a very long letter back explaining why it was very important to me that I could match the importance of English with the importance of German. And I said to them, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to praise him for reading in German. You just have to sign it off like any other reading. So if you don't yet already, there's one job that is very, very easy to integrate to encourage parents. I know that, as I said, my son's now 16. So in year 2, you're going back about, what, 9 years now. So I know it's got a lot better in recent years, but if that's something that your school's not yet doing, obviously if you're a secondary school, you might not have reading diaries, but that's a really quick fix for something to happen very, very quickly. Next one is slightly more complicated, but I really did want to explain it because a lot of work and love has gone into this piece of work. So in 2020, I published a paper that explored the emotional and pragmatic reasons why families speak home, or why they want to pass on their home languages to their children. If, for example, there is a grandparent who doesn't speak English living in the house, then there's no question that the child will need to become fluent in the home or heritage language. But what is often much more invisible is the emotional well-being that is linked to maintaining the home or heritage language. So long story short, that paper came out. It introduced this framework about emotional and pragmatic reasons for maintaining home and heritage languages. And on the back of that, I developed a further study which gave parents, people really, the opportunity to self-evaluate. So it's a quiz, it's a questionnaire that's presented as a quiz, and it spits out basically this framework, but prettier. And each quadrant fills up with a percentage, say, oh, you're 88% this, and you're 64% this, and you're 33% that. And then it helps parents understand what that might mean in reality. And one of the reasons I'm mentioning this is because I've had parents get in touch where one parent had a very different attachment to the language from the other parent. And I have worked with families where different attitudes towards languages, excuse me, have led to divorce. So I've also noticed that while there is a lot of communication in home and heritage languages, there's not necessarily a lot of communication about the language. So what I wanted to create is an opportunity for parents to self-evaluate and self-express. But what this also does is it is possible for me to set up a subspace. So say somebody gets in touch and say, I would really like to understand the parents, the families in our school better. I can say, great, here's your subspace. I give you a code. And when you ask parents to fill it in, just ask them to enter the code, and then you have access to all the data at the end. It's ethically reviewed by the University of Sheffield. You do not collect names, email addresses, etc. But it does give you a really good overview of what the kind of feelings linked to home and heritage languages are. So there's a link there, but also if anybody on the back of this would like to get in touch with me, it doesn't have to be a school. I've got one subspace set up for all of Iceland, interestingly, where they have a whole mother tongue association, and they got in touch and they said, we would really love to survey Iceland. If you have students, if you're working in higher education, you've got students who might want to do this as a research project, all of this is entirely possible. But it signals as a school that you are interested in the attitudes and attachments to home languages and understanding how parents feel about their home languages. If anybody would like to talk more about that, just drop me an email afterwards. And finally, this is the same study that the child said, I've been here for 6 years and nobody knows that I speak Hungarian. Some of you might be aware of the idea of a river of reading. A river of reading creates a more or less chronological account of what reading children view as important. Not their favorites, but what they're reading, which reading they have done that they class as important. And I did a study, it looks like it's brand new, it's not actually. It first came out in 2021, and then they kick around on the internet for a while before they get a paper copy number. So it only just got a 2024 issue, but it's been around for a while. And what I found in this study is that multilingual children have much more complex ideologies and understandings in terms of what they understand as important for them. And that picture here on the left, this is a river of reading. This is just a small portion of it. I think maybe about a fifth. And you can sort of see the sellotape. It was sheets of A4 sellotaped together. And this was a child who moved from Spain to Sheffield. And you can see the line there in the middle. And for a couple of pages, there is Spanish reading on the left and English reading on the right. And then suddenly, and the child hadn't realized she'd done this, on the final page, there was no more division between the languages. They were just books. But when she talked about it, you can't quite see, but there's links there with the first book I read in English, the first book I read in the UK, the first book that introduced me to an English cultural thing like brownies, and then I went to brownies afterwards. So because multilingual children have so many more cultural references, they might have histories of migration. There's not a picture of that here, but one of the children cited a book that had been and lived in 3 countries with him, and that's why it was important, because it had made the same journey. And this one here on the right is a Hebrew-speaking child, And you can see there's different creativities involved in the River of Reading. And again, online, there is, in this instance, I went all out. There is a staff training video, there's a film for children, there's a handout to go home. And parental involvement, again, is needed in order to bring in these earliest memories. I've worked with children who lived across 2 households. And in some instances that meant 2 languages, so 1 per household, when the parents were divorced. And the River of Reading, it is just a beautiful, beautiful exercise to show that all reading matters and that reading across all languages is important. But again, to understand what children view as important reading, going beyond the favorites. And again, those instances where children self-edited their identities, this is a really great opportunity to welcome all their languages into the classroom through this activity. I've prepared about 40 minutes for talking, and we're doing okay. We're pretty much there. So in terms of future plans, something I've not spoken about at all, but if anybody's got questions, I'm really happy to talk about at length, is I worked and facilitated the creation of a multilingual children's library here in Sheffield. It's award-winning, but there's been a lot of learning in terms of how to facilitate a multilingual library. There's also a whole section on the Lost World website under, I think, other activities, with a sort of information sheet, a 30-page long information sheet on how you might create a multilingual library. This photo is from a multilingual storytelling session, I think last September, possibly. And I've just found out that it'll be on display in Sheffield. This particular photo, they had very serious looking ones to choose from, but they picked this one to highlight research that the institution's doing in the community. So our silly faces will be all over Sheffield. And for those of you who know your stories, this is the Town Musicians of Bremen, which lends itself beautifully to multilingual storytelling because you've got a lot of animal sounds. So you can ask children, what sound does a cockerel make in your language? How do you say dog? How do you say cat? There's a lot of simple vocabulary there that you can integrate into multilingual storytelling, again, without being multilingual yourself. I've already mentioned the 30 Days Wild to dip your toes in, and that will run on the Lost World's Twitter account. And potential to facilitate staff training, sharing best practice, etc. And if I can help with that, I'm very happy to do so. And this is my last slide before the discussions. So just some final words. You do not need to be a language specialist to support your multilingual learners. There are really so many opportunities to bring in multilingualism on a daily basis. And I've mentioned normalizing before celebrating. Celebrating is great, but what we hope to achieve is a day in, day out welcoming of multilingualism. Take your time. As I mentioned, I spoke to a whole group, I can't remember, I think there were eight 8-year-olds, and for 20 minutes we all danced around the bush, and none of them were talking about their multilingual learning because several years of schooling had taught them that as an adult in a school context, I would likely want to know about their English reading only. So undoing that will take time. So don't be disheartened if you run an activity and it's not a 100% success. It will take time to change how children feel about which languages are welcome, how they can use them, etc., and to build up that full linguistic repertoire. Build a circle of support around you. There's obviously the Twinkl EAL resources on the Twitter. If there's people here who, if you get a chance to connect with each other, or if there's a circle of support around you in school to discuss, learn, connect with each other, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. Be prepared for mixed reactions from parents. Many parents that I've worked with have been 100% welcoming. There have also been parents who thought, no, home language for the home, school language for the school, thank you very much. Again, we haven't got time to go into it in detail. COVID did quite a lot to sort of break down homeschool barriers when it came to language learning in both directions. I've worked with heritage language families who were deeply troubled by having to sort of use more English at home to facilitate their children's at-home learning. But otherwise, I've also spoken to families where COVID was a great opportunity to really work on home and heritage languages. But yeah, be prepared that not every parent will necessarily be of the same opinion on this matter. And then just finally, I would love to know how you get on. Quite seriously, if you use any of the activities on the Lost Worlds website, I would love to share anything that you do. I'd be absolutely delighted. And if I can help in any way, do let me know. And that is it. That's as far as I've got with the discussion. I'll leave this slide up for a second to give people a chance to grab the email address and Twitter if you want. And then I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you all back in the room. Thank you very much.